All right, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We are now live. And this is the very first session of our very new series of Carbon Experts Live. And today's session is from forest to frame, the role of timber in sustainable construction. We have here a Michaela waiting as a special featuring guest. So thank you everyone for joining today. Before we get started, I would like to ask a question from everyone. So where are you dialing in from today? So where are you based? It's gonna be afternoon for some and evening for some, morning for some of us. So where are you dialing in from? So great if you can go to chat or comment section, depending where you are at. So if you can go to chat or comments and type in there, which country, which city are you dialing in from? So we can see where people are located. So let's see. All right, good stuff. So we have people dialing in. Okay, so we can see a lot of people coming in. That's great. So let me give you a little bit of introduction what this Carbon Experts Live is about. So today we're kickstarting a brand new series. This is the very first time for us, but it's a monthly live conversation series about low carbon construction. As you can see, the name of the session is Carbon Experts Live, and my colleague Travis, he's there already waiting to get started. So he's hosting the series together with me, and each of these live sessions we are featuring guests, and these guests are experts in embodied carbon and sustainable materials and much more. And today, like I said, we have Michaela Harms here joining us, and we will get to introduce her shortly. So my name is Jenny. Great to meet you, everyone. I'm joining from our marketing team, and why I'm joining here is to make sure that it's going to be a smooth experience for everyone. And I'm based in Finland, in Espoo. And Travis, whereabout are you based today?
I am calling in from Calgary, Calgary in Canada, if anybody knows where that is. So basically the western part of Canada.
So it's going to be morning for you. How about Michaela? Where are you today?
Yeah, I'm calling in from Madison, Wisconsin. So
right.
In the morning, not quite as early as Travis, but
yeah, but still morning for you. Yeah, I can see people have joined from all over the world. That's fantastic. We have a great audience today. So let's look at the kind of a little bit of housekeeping rules. So what to expect next. So we will now kind of go to the actual beef of the session. So we cover some key questions, topics with Michaela related to the role of timber in low carbon construction. We will then challenge Michaela a bit. So we have prepared some wrap-up questions. Yeah, don't be afraid. And then finally, we will be doing a live Q&A at the end. So quick heads up to everyone, please submit your questions already during this session. So we will be picking the best ones at the end, and we hope to answer many of the questions already during this live session. And we have also other experts joining here this session, so I'm sure they're more than happy to answer some of the questions as we go. So with that, Travis, are we ready to get started? Michaela, I can see you're smiling. You're definitely ready.
Sounds great.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. And yeah, welcome everybody to the first episode of Carbon Experts Live series. Yeah, today is our inaugural episode. So we're just getting kicked off. Bear with us if there's anything that's imperfect. We're definitely going to be improving things, and we'd love to get any feedback on that sort of stuff. So first, I just want to introduce Michaela. Just a little bit of background on Michaela. Michaela Harms is the Senior Director of Mass Timber at Sterling Structural, and she's an expert in mass timber construction and has a background that includes research and development for structural, round, and heavy timber manufacture, providing sustainable forestry and wood products expertise for an international certification body as well. Her work has been published in Structures magazine, and in 2021, she presented to Wisconsin state government officials, making the case for mass timber building code updates that will support Wisconsin's woodland economies. Michaela holds a degree in civil engineering on sustainable building from Metropolia University of Applied Sciences in Helsinki, Finland. So welcome. Thanks for joining us, Michaela.
Thanks, Travis.
That's the technical background. Just to, I guess, kick things off, and I'll hand the mic over to you. What prompted you to get into sustainability and drive you towards becoming an expert in timber?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that introduction. So as you said, I studied, I did my studies in Helsinki in Finland. I am from Wisconsin. I'm from the States, but I went over there to do my studies, and I learned a lot about wood. As we know, in the Nordic countries, there's a ton of timber use, and Central and Northern Europe as well. And when I moved back to the States and took a position at a company, I realized very quickly I think I'd taken maybe one concrete class my whole career in my education. And I was going to be a pretty useless structural engineer in the States because a lot of steel and concrete stuff. So I found myself just diving right into wood products manufacturing, which was really a bit more my speed anyway. I really like to get my hands dirty. I come from kind of a construction union family. And so I used my knowledge on the structural side of timber, which wasn't, a lot of the universities in the States at that point, and it's definitely getting better, didn't even have wood classes. You'd have to go to agricultural technology or agricultural engineering to even take a wood class. So it's exciting to see that change, and a lot more structural engineers getting wood underneath their belt as well. So then working with manufacturers and in certification, and I found myself walking through the forest with some of the best foresters out there, learning about the sustainability hands-on, and really trying to find markets for underutilized species. And it's kind of just all snowballs from there, and slowly but surely, and here I am working in CLT now. So.
Perfect. So I guess leading on from that, with different species, different constructions, why is timber so important for low carbon construction?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the biggest thing that it always comes back to is the resource itself. So timber is such an incredible product in the sense that it's a natural, regenerative, product that you can source very regionally if you think about it, right? That can be said for other materials as well, but those materials are a bit more depletive. So my interest, I really loved a lot of the hippie building and straw bale and adobe, and I got really interested in that when I was working on farms when I was younger. And I do think that there's something really inherently sustainable about using a natural material, just kind of like in agriculture and food. So being able to walk through a forest and understand that tree is something that will sequester carbon within your building, and having that connection. I think that sustainability really comes from connection with nature. And connection with how the world works, right? So understanding that kind of biological system and being more connected to that biological system, even within our buildings, I think just naturally leads its way to low carbon and sustainable construction.
Perfect. I'd love to get back to this. You did mention different species earlier, but maybe we can come back to that later.
Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously timber building is hugely growing in popularity. Every time we go to a trade show, we hear about this. We see a lot of really interesting buildings. I'm originally from Vancouver, and every time I go back, I see high rises going up that are being promoted that are using mass timber. So it's hugely popular right now. Would you see this as a fad, or is this is there actual a real sustainability base that is tied to this product?
Yeah, I would say this is definitely not a fad for sure. I mean, we've been building with wood for centuries and centuries and centuries. If you see the stav churches of Norway or a lot of the old temples in Japan, there's these incredible buildings that are still standing that are built out of wood. We know it's a great material. And at that point, when you didn't have a global supply chain, finding that regional product was so important. And we're kind of coming back full circle to how important it is to find more regional, lower carbon types of materials in our buildings. I think it was kind of interesting because I think I had heard maybe 5 and 6 years ago people saying, "Oh, timber is a fad," but especially mass timber, right? Like, I think it's these words that we use. We say mass timber or stuff like that makes people kind of think that it's this fad type of building. But really, we need to do a lot of building, especially, in North America. And I know it's similar in a lot of places in Europe. We have a huge housing shortage. And the way that we get more buildings is by utilizing the supply chains that can sustain them. And so one thing we've seen with steel and concrete, it's very depletive. The fluctuation of commodity based on, steel used to come from North America for a lot of things, but now it's coming from much further away. So trying to bring these materials back to that vernacular, local kind of spaces, I don't think is a fad at all. I think it's necessary and something that is really required for us to meet the needs of what we need out of our building stock. So I think it's sustainable. I think it's here to stay. And I think it's a really great way to bolster and boost a lot of regional economies that maybe have lost some of that. You know very well, being from the West Coast, that there was this thriving logging industry. And then to kind of have that go down was very hard on those economies. And we see the same thing all over the world. And there's a lot of different countries now investing in reforestation. And so it's here to stay for sure.
Cool. And something that I just want to touch on is for anybody that's non-technical that might be in our audience, that maybe not an architect or an engineer, how would you define mass timber versus, like you mentioned, we've been building with wood for a long time. What are we talking about when we are discussing mass timber?
Yeah. Well, I just want to start off with saying that any wood building is a great building. So if you're using stick frame or anything like that we don't currently consider mass timber, also, you're still getting that benefit of that material. But when we talk about mass timber, what we're saying is now we can bring these materials, these highly engineered materials, into taller buildings like you're talking about in Vancouver, buildings that can handle seismic, and a lot of these other more, commercial and larger constructions. So mass timber in itself is a category of engineered wood products that have larger cross sections and are of kind of like, larger diameters. And not the trees themselves, but the products there. So that's kind of it. So it includes cross-laminated timber. It includes glued laminated timber or glue lam, dowel laminated timber, heavy timber and round timber also fit in those categories. So keeping those as the same, not doing the cutting down and re-gluing, but using the trees as they are. And then also, products like laminated veneer lumber and things like that. So it's a big category, but what we're talking about is large cross sections of material to kind of replace steel and concrete in larger construction.
Perfect. That's a great definition. I love that. So as we're looking at wood products, is it actually the most sustainable product out there? And really, is this always the case? Like, are there circumstances where it does actually make more sense from a carbon standpoint to be looking at, say, steel or concrete?
Yeah, well, I am 1000% of the opinion that you should use the material that suits the building. So you can never say that it's always the case. That's never going to work. And actually, I think that in a lot of places, hybrid construction, each material has their benefits and has their drawbacks. And so when we're looking at a building holistically and saying, if I'm in Florida, I'm definitely not going to be putting wood on my base floor, right? We've got termites, we've got moisture. So maybe we're building on 2 stories of concrete podium. So it's just understanding how that structure goes all together. But I would say that the more wood we can get into buildings in general, in the places where it's best suited, we're always going to have, or we're most often going to have a better carbon footprint for that building. Now, I know that you're going to ask me a lot of questions about sourcing, so we'll go into that a bit more because it definitely matters where you're sourcing material, but not quite as, but I think we ask that question more of wood than we do of steel and concrete. We don't have that same, like, what mill and what mountain is my steel ore coming out of? But we do ask those questions when it comes to timber. So I think inherently we're asking more of the questions that need to be asked to make a sustainable choice when we use timber. So I think that's one really good benefit. And then also that it's abundantly available. I know that some people have, and I'm going to use this and people are probably going to be like, oh my God, but a little bit of what we call the Lorax syndrome, where you think that it's not, cutting down a tree is bad. When you talk to foresters, we need to be cutting more trees in a lot of forests, especially in North America. And I want to kind of use this time to say, I know a lot about North American forestry. I know a little bit about European forestry. I don't know as much about the rest of the world. So take with what I'm saying as with a grain of salt, and understand that kind of that's where my expertise lies. But in general, when we think about these regenerative materials, whether that's bamboo, hemp, wood, it's much easier to have more of a regional supply chain with those. So again, we're asking more of those connected questions back to the source that we don't ask about other materials. And that's what leads to wood being one of the most sustainable, is because we're asking those questions and really diving in.
Totally. And I think you covered a couple of these, but what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions you run into with timber?
Yeah, I would say it's changed a lot. I've gone over the last 10 years in this industry or whatever. I've had a real radical shift in the way that people talk about timber, especially in North America. I think I was giving a talk on timber maybe 7-8 years ago, and I got somebody in the back scream at me, "You're cutting down, you're killing trees," and now I think that and how you respond to something like that is this. Thanks. That's a really great question. I'd love to talk about regenerative and sustainable forest practices. And so I think the biggest misconception is really around forestry itself and the full supply chain. The nice thing about wood is it has especially in North America, and when you're sourcing from North America for North American projects, and you really have a very transparent supply chain. You can really nail down where a lot of this stuff is coming from. So that the big misconception is cutting down trees is bad, right? So cutting down trees is not bad. A lot of the wildfire issues that we're having in the West come from overstocked forests. So forests that haven't been, we kind of stopped natural forest fires from happening, which was kind of counterproductive, because then we have these bigger ones because all this fuel. So these smaller diameter things that usually would burn in kind of natural wildfires that were smaller and more part of that ecological system. We stifled those so that kind of builds up, and now you have this huge tinder basket essentially, where when fire goes through, it just goes so fast and so hot that we can't contain it. So really, one of the best prescriptions for these overstocked forests is utilization, selective thinning, getting some of those small diameter things out of there that would have gone through natural smaller fires, and finding markets and economic incentive to do so. Because if the foresters and public, private land, it doesn't matter. If they don't have economic incentive, they don't have the money to do it. So industries like the forest products industry making economic incentives for that utilization is so important to the health of our forests, which it's kind of counterintuitive to what we think about when we think about the original thoughts of cutting down trees. And yes, there have been issues with clear cutting and not replanting. But at this point in the Nordics, in North America, our fiber baskets or our forests are growing faster and expanding faster than we are using them. So that's, I think, the biggest thing to always remember when we talk about this, is that we're not using enough wood to keep our forests healthy in North America. So we got to make sure that we make these markets for that.
Yeah, and you touched on like economic incentives. When considering building with mass timber instead of, say, steel or concrete, or creating hybrid type buildings, is there a cost implication to this? Generally, when we look at sustainable buildings, we just assume they're going to cost more. How would you look at mass timber in this regard?
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely regional, and for this one, for sure, I can only talk about North America. I think what we've seen is, for mass timber to get into more buildings, it had to be highly custom. We had redundancy of engineers, we had redundancy of architects to really help get that product out there. It's kind of like the highest fashion on the runway, right? Like, that's how you get down, and then you have this trickle down to where, now more of the middle tier buildings are doing it. And now we're finally getting to the place where we can get this type of stuff into affordable housing. So at the beginning, because of that requirement for high customization and extra support, yeah, it definitely is and was a premium product. But now what we're seeing with a lot of like manufacturers like Sterling and a lot of the other more commodity forest product manufacturers, we're bringing that highly custom product into a more standardized and repeatable system like steel diking, like hollow core slab concrete, and bringing that cost back down to what would be similar to other typologies. And that's when you get broad adoption. So I think we're at a really nice tipping point in North America where wood is, and last year and some of the years of the pandemic where our supply chain for wood got so out of whack isn't the greatest, but we're coming back down to earth. The commodity product is stabilizing, and we're getting those price points down to match other products. So yes, there's a cost implication sometimes, but not always. So it's about how you design. It's about how you think of the building as a whole. And it's also about your relationship with your installer, because you can install these buildings faster, right? So the faster you get a building installed, the sooner you're collecting on rent. And so when you balance that entire system, or, now, pardon me, you can have an exposed ceiling with CLT and have that be the finished material. Now you're not dropping the ceiling and adding, gypsum. So when you look at that whole assembly and the whole, construction process, I don't think there's as many cost implications, but it takes that extra study. And I think that over the next 3 years, we're going to see so many of these case studies get out into the industry that really show that this isn't as high margin or as high cost product as it once was. Perfect.
We are running out of time. I do want to touch on end of life scenarios. And would you look at, I guess, what would you consider ideal or less than ideal end of life scenarios for mass timber?
Yeah, I think
define end of life scenarios as well.
Yeah, so the end of life scenario is when we're deconstructing or taking, well, hopefully deconstructing, but when the building's kind of completed its cycle, and what happens with that material. So I think that a lot of times, we make assumptions, right? We make assumptions that we're incinerating or we're putting it into, landfills and things like that. And often what I see with life cycle assessments, whole building LCAs, is those assumptions just aren't actually what's reality, right? So I can tell you, I'm not going to a site and seeing them burn everything. That's just not what's happening. And hopefully we're moving in a direction where we're thinking, and I know we are because this has been a hot topic in mass timber, is we're thinking about deconstruction, we're thinking about reuse, we're thinking about secondary and tertiary markets. So for Sterling, we have whole nother section of our business that's for infrastructural use. So roads and crane mats and things like that, where we can actually eventually, if we deconstructed a building, it could go into that market and serve another 5 years. And then after that, We have tertiary markets where it comes into animal bedding and it goes into mulch for arboretums and things like this. So the most important thing to remember about wood is, and mass timber is, there's so many options for combined heat and power opportunities, for composting opportunities, that this material is really easy to kind of have other end of life scenarios. Is this fully enacted across the industry yet? No, it's not. But there's a lot of people working towards it. So like even the city of Portland, Oregon, they have an ordinance that all buildings must be deconstructed. So there's been some really cool studies about taking the lumber out of buildings and maybe putting it back into an engineered wood product such as CLT or glulam and reusing it. There's definitely some concern about the supply chain, like mass timber uses a lot of wood, right? So would we have enough in that scenario to create a market? We don't know yet, but the entire wood products industry is working on what can we do with this material afterwards. And if you go into any wood products manufacturing facility, nothing goes to waste. That sawdust goes to secondary and tertiary markets, the chips, the edge cutoffs, everything goes into another market. So that's what's really important, is just making sure that everything is used again, and understanding that at the end of its life, it can be returned to the earth in compost, or it can be used in combined heat and power. So there's a lot of ways to use timber that there aren't for other materials.
That's amazing. For the sake of time, I have so many more questions to ask you, Michaela, but maybe
Sure.
we can pick these up. Maybe we can pick these up next time. But I guess just to wrap up, what's happened? What changes happened in the industry? Let me try that again. What changes happened in the industry recently that you're most excited about?
Yeah. Oh man, so many. I think one of the big things is a lot of architects and engineers have really kind of like dove into sourcing, understanding where is my material coming from. Is a sustainable certification always the best, or can I get a more regional product and have a shorter transport distance and still understand that it's coming from a regenerative and sustainable forest within my community? So I think that what I'm really enjoying is seeing architects ask these questions, as opposed to 5-6 years ago it was, oh, wood is bad because we're cutting down trees. It's really like that whole mentality has shifted. And I think a lot of that comes from what we've seen in food too, where we're more interested in, where does our food come from? Where do our products come from? What kind of communities are we supporting with our actions and with our dollars? And I think that you see that a lot in the wood products industry. And then also just across the board, all of the code updates. So, before there would be a lot of building code officials just really didn't understand the material and were concerned about fire and didn't really understand char rates, that wood actually will char and protect itself, and you have a longer amount of time to get in there, get things out, and safely put out that fire and make sure that your firefighters are safe while you're doing it. Whereas with steel, once steel hits its melting point, it all collapses at once. So we have to, I'm very excited to see that building code officials are learning, they're listening. We're having changes in our building codes to allow for more timber use, because we just, we should be using more wood for sure.
Perfect. And if you had the power to change one thing in the industry, just one thing, whether policy, perception, investment, development, anything like that, what would it be?
Wow. Oh my gosh. I think it would be
Tough one, I know.
Yeah. I think it would be greater connection to your local source. I understand all the implications of the supply chain. Like our company, we use products from the South, but we use rail to transport them, right? So a very low carbon transport option. I think just getting more people into the forest and understanding that every step of the supply chain, because it's a short supply chain. It's really cool to see that tree to your product really doesn't go through too much. So having more of a connection to that regional supply chain, whether that region is your entire, country, because that we all are working together that way, but really just understanding where that stuff is coming from and how it all works. I think that would be the thing I would want to change, is helping people understand the supply chain.
Perfect. Yeah, that's awesome, Michaela. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jenny, I think we've had, I'm going to stop there just because we're having a lot of questions come in and we are running out of time. I have so many questions for you, but Jenny, go ahead if you want to throw some.
And there's also a lot of questions from the audience.
Sure.
So super exciting topic. But we have one more question for you before we go to the live Q&A. So if we go to the next question, the very last question from our side. So since we are running this on a monthly cadence, and next time we're going to bring Anthony Pak from 𝗖𝗿𝗄𝗏 and Carbon Leadership Forum as our next guest. We would like to give you an opportunity to place maybe a challenging question for him. So we will ask this question from him next time. So what question would you like to ask?
Wow, that's a good one. I would say, I think that my question would be, in the simplest terms, how can we, or what is the, actually this is it, what is the simplest way we can lower the embodied carbon of our built environment?
Okay, that's a tough one.
I got to challenge him a little bit. I think simplicity is the way we need to go next, and I'd love to hear his answer to that.
Super. I'm sure we're going to get a simple answer. So stay tuned. That's coming up next. So now let's go to the questions from you listening. So again, you can keep asking the questions, put it in the chat, and we'll try to pick it up. But let's start going through the questions that has already come up. So let's take a first question from Max. How much do you value sustainable forest management certifications?
Yeah, great question. So sourcing and certification sourcing are important. So first and foremost, I'm going to come at it from the North American perspective. So I apologize if, for other folks out there, but that's the one I know the best. So the Clean Air and Water Act of the 1970s really solved a lot of the issues that we had with any type of degenerative or destructive forestry. It really did. We really need to thank a lot of the people that worked so hard back then to put that through and get that into law. So starting there and understanding that North America inherently has really sustainable forest product management practices. And a lot of that comes from our forests are growing, they're expanding, they are not diminishing as a whole, right? And so these people that own these forests, whether it's small families that have owned them for generations or larger groups, the incentive for them to keep regrowing is very important because we have a thriving wood products industry. So what I'm trying to say is, first and foremost, if you have a North American project, source from North America. That's the number one thing. If you start there, you've already done a great thing. And you know that you're going to be kind of have a good thing. Maybe, some of the hardwoods, you'd have to look at a little bit more, but really, honestly, North American forestry is sustainable forestry. And then the next step from there, and there's Katie Fernholz, who runs Dovetail Partners. She puts this better than anyone out there. If you go into the grocery store and you want to get organic vegetables, but they're out of the organic vegetables, which would be, your SFI, your FSC, your PEFC certified timber. If they're out of it or it's not available, you're not going to go back and buy hot dogs, which is the concrete or the steel or something like that. You're going to go buy the conventional vegetable because it's the next best thing. So, first and foremost, buy the vegetable, get wood into your building. What I see too often is people get it hung up on the certification and say, I need SFI certification on this, or I need FSC certification on this. And the supply chain just isn't developed enough for that specific thing. Or maybe you're using a species that doesn't work well with that certification. So, at least get the vegetables, get the wood into the building. And if you can get that certification, absolutely go for it. It's always, it's great to have this third-party review of those practices, but don't get hung up on that. First and foremost, source regional, source North American, or if you're in Europe, source European, or if you're in, other countries, source from your country first. And then if you can get a certification and you can afford to have that certification, go for it. But what I hate to see is don't think you need to have FSC or SFI. And then if you can't get it, you go back to concrete and steel. That's the choice that I see happen sometimes. We don't need this all or nothing. We got to start somewhere. And like I said, we have really great practices here, so you can feel very good about at least starting there.
Oh, we actually have a follow-up question on that.
Sure,
And I'm just trying to pick which one we will go with. But let's quickly let's be picky. Okay, let's take the follow-up question. So without legislation or incentives, the forestry industry is still cutting as business as usual. Is the only way to ensure our wood is coming from a sustainable source is to use FSC wood? Is that really
I would say definitely not. Definitely not. So first of all, it's important to note that FSC rules are different in every country. So if you're just make sure you understand what the FSC rule is in your country, understand the background. All of it is great. It's really important to try to do better, right? But because of the economic incentive to regrow timber, if you're selling timber, it's pretty darn rare at this point that we would be clear cutting and moving timber out. And in fact, the more we don't use it and the more we don't have economic drivers for wood products and things like that, the more they're actually going to cut them down and redevelop it into maybe agricultural land, or they're going to redevelop it into something else. So the way we keep our forests is creating economic, at least in North America. And I understand that legislatively things work differently in other countries, but in North America, we're really driven by economic incentives. So the more timber we use, the more we incentivize those landowners and those timber owners to regrow their timber. And like I said, if you look at any of the maps that are out there, our timber and fiber baskets are expanding. They are not diminishing. We have so much wood to use. We need to use more. FSC is great. SFI is great. But using wood in general, especially when we're talking about North American softwoods or European softwoods and a lot of the hardwoods too, let's start there and make sure you use it, and don't get hung up on certifications. Again, it's a nice bonus to have on top, but it's not going to make or break your project as far as the sustainability practices go.
And now to keep it simple, just use timber.
Just use wood.
Use wood. Alrighty, another question. Let's go to the next topic. So this is specifically, hi Michaela, given a viable market and economic incentive for timber, what are your sustainability program for regenerating the forest in relation to supply and replanting? Yeah,
so I mean, I keep kind of, I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but with that incentive and with the growth of these industries, we are using more wood, which makes them plant more wood, which is great. So kind of a cautionary tale of what happens when you don't. So I'm from Wisconsin in the upper Midwest. We had a big decline in paper use, right? So a lot of us, we don't use much paper anymore. That decline in paper use really diminished the economic incentive to pull out pulp product from our forest, which is thinnings and kind of like smaller diameter, lower value species. And so when those didn't have a market, they were left. And so now we have a lot of these very overstocked, very unhealthy forests. The more a forest gets overstocked, the more it is susceptible to fire, invasive species, and a lot of these kinds of things. So when that market just disappeared and went away, it actually hurt the health of our forest. So we have to now be looking at new ways to utilize that timber. And so, you have to think about these things as far as those economic drivers and how they affect the health of the forest. So again, I think simplistically, please use wood. It's good for our forest. We need to be using more. And, don't take my word for it. Go ask a forester. Foresters will tell you we definitely need to be using more wood because we need the incentive to manage these forests and to pull more trees out to keep the health going. So that's kind of where I'm at on that one.
Okay.
How about let's take one more, Travis? Yes.
Yeah.
One
Last question before we close this up. We've kind of skirted around this a little bit, and something you mentioned with life cycle assessment when we're modeling the total carbon footprint of our building throughout the life cycle. Something that is pretty popular right now, and we spend a lot of time looking at, is biogenic carbon storage, also known as carbon sequestration. How important is this when looking at these buildings, and how do we want to approach that?
Yeah, you pulled out the sticky question for the end, didn't you? The way that I approach this is, let's set it aside as another metric completely on its own. I think when we incorporate it into our LCA, it gets confusing. It really does. And I think that when you pull it out as a side benefit, right, it is very beneficial to say, all right, so about half of timber by weight is carbon, right? So when you are using timber in your building, you are making a carbon storage of half of its weight. Which is an exceptional a thing to do, right? We want to be storing carbon. We don't want to be releasing carbon. Now, when we look at it from whole building life cycle assessment, we're thinking about that end of life. And so however it ends up being released in end of life is really what we're looking at with whole building LCA. So that's why they kind of need to be kept a little bit separate in thought, right? Yes, biogenic carbon storage is an added extra benefit of using wood, but when we use it within WBLCA, we get into some tricky situations where it doesn't always compare apples to apples for other products that don't have that. Granted, everybody has their opinion on this, so please, please don't take mine as gold or anything like that. But what I usually tell people is, don't think about it from that perspective. Think about it as an extra added benefit that you are storing carbon in a building for longer than you would if you were doing something else with it. So that's the way I would answer that.
Perfect.
That is perfect. That kind of takes us to the end of the Q&A. So thanks everyone for being very, very active and posting other questions. Next time we'll make sure to allocate even more time for the Q&A part.
Sure.
So thanks everyone. But I have some couple kind of good tips for you if you're very keen on learning more about timber. So there's some good kind of resources if you go to oneclicklca.com/timber. So there's, for example, this type of eco-design article, structural timber and related assets, very, very valuable and fresh, just published couple weeks ago. So go and have a look. Then I have another tip in case you're kind of interested in kind of learning more. So you might be familiar with One Click LCA's Academy, but there's already 2 kind of upcoming free full-week trainings coming for EPDs and building LCA. So you can find these at oneclicklca.academy. And then I'm sure the team is attendees are very keen on learning more about, Michaela, your expertise. So what's the best way of being in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Jenny. Here you can see my email and our websites as well. So, feel free to get in touch with me. If you have any additional questions, I'm happy to answer, happy to help. And we look forward to seeing more wood in your buildings where it makes sense.
Thanks, Michaela. And Travis, anything from your side, final words before we finish it off? How people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is always a good channel to connect with me. You can also email me there. Alternatively, my phone number is also on the One Click LCA website, so I can be reached by any of those methods.
Fantastic. All righty, and then, like mentioned, we have another episode coming up. So next, we will be having Anthony as a guest. And the topic of this session will be moving the needle on embodied carbon, how to drive effective policy. So you can already register at oneclicklca.com/live. And we really much look forward to seeing everyone there. And with these words, I want to thank everyone for attending today and being very, very active. So thank you so much. And a special thank you to Michaela for sharing your expertise. Very, very interesting. And thanks, Travis, for hosting the session today. So with that, Thank you, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.